third session of our journey through Song of Songs.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Oh, let's get this right. So my usual content warning. Song of Songs contains adult content. If you're not into that kind of thing, please look forward to other adult ed offerings here at First Presbyterian Church Deerfield later in the season. But as I always say, Song of Songs contains adult content, but in that regard, it's really just like the rest of the Bible. Well, maybe not just like the rest of the Bible. Song of Songs is not just like the rest of the Bible, but in regard to adult content, I think it's fair to say that's pretty true. Last week, we looked a little bit, those who are here. Oh, and let me just, as I always do, for folks that are playing our game remotely, folks that are participating at a distance, I invite you to also participate by asking questions or making comments when you choose, just as the folks who are here in person. And you can do that by sending questions to an email address, questions@anuma.com, A-N like in Nancy, U-M-M, that's Mary, Mary, A-N-U-M-M-A, questions@anuma.com. And I'll check in on my phone periodically and see if there's any questions coming in remotely. Just as folks here, I hope will feel comfortable raising your hand at any time. You don't have to wait till I ask for questions. When you got a question, you got a question. Get your hand up in the air. Any time is the right time to be engaging me and one another that way. Last week, those who were here, we talked a little bit about the allegorical interpretations of the Song of Songs. That is, this literature that, as some of you said a couple weeks back, really looks very much like a young girl's diary. A lot of talk between lovers was interpreted in both Jewish and Christian history as standing in for something that it doesn't appear to be. This material that appears to be romantic utterances between two lovers was interpreted in rabbinic Jewish interpretation as an allegory for the love that exists between Israel and the God of Israel. And in Christian interpretation, it was often interpreted as an allegory of the love that exists between Christ and the church, right? The church being the bride of Christ. And we looked at how in the early centuries of the Common Era, there was sort of a fixed sense to this, was there not? With the rabbinic Jewish interpreters, they brought the same key to every text, whether it was in Song of Songs or elsewhere. Everything is about Sinai, the giving of the law at Sinai, and the Exodus from Egypt. And when they brought that key to the Song of Songs, it turns out all the texts are about the Exodus from Egypt and the giving of the law of Sinai, right? You bring the same key to the text, and you'll find more or less the same thing there every time. That sounds like a very ungenerous way to put it, but I'm speaking in sweeping terms so we can get on to other things. Origen, for example, on the Christian side, he brought the same key. Jesus is the key that he brought to all texts in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament. And it turned out they're all about Jesus, right? So when in Song of Songs, my lover's name is like oil poured out. It is so sweet. And Origen says, you know whose name is really sweet? Jesus. And so this becomes a text about Jesus. Whereas the later medieval folks like Bernard and, this is just review from last week, so you can pass the exam. The medievals like Bernard and Teresa, the key that they brought to the Song of Songs is the soul is always making a journey to be reunited with Christ, with what they call the Logos. And so in reading the Song of Songs through that lens, that journey from the soul, of the soul to find its source in God becomes a romantic journey, right? Becomes a romantic journey and even a very embodied physical journey, right? As the Song of Songs is a very embodied and physical romantic literature. And whereas for the early folks, the rabbinics and Origen, there was a sense that when we brought the key, Sinai or Jesus, we would then know what the text is saying, was sort of the sense. With these medievals, what you were being invited into when reading the Song of Songs through the lens of the journey of the soul to the Logos, to Christ, is not a key to unlock the true meaning of every text, but to enter into the mystery of material that both Bernard and Teresa said is hard to understand. It often seems not to make sense, and they loved that. Teresa says, I don't understand, and I love that I don't understand. That entering into the relationship entering into the text is entering into a relationship. And when we enter into a relationship with a person, especially a romantic relationship, we all know this, it's not to solve them or fix them, right? It's to enter into the mystery of them, to enter into the mystery and the I don't know-ness of who they are. And so it was for the medievals. And that being so, I couldn't get it out of my mind during the week that makes a nice jumping off place, I think, to go into a major theme, in some ways the major theme of the Song of Songs, seeking and finding, finding and losing and seeking. Throughout and we'll look at some text together is my plan for the day. But for these medievalists, that the entering into the song is entering into the soul always seeking Christ, always seeking its union with its other in that romantic quest. What better entry into the song from there than into all the seeking and finding that happens here? I was taking out some of my notes because I want to make sure there's things I remember. So I thought we would just look at about 3 texts. And in looking at those 3 texts, we'll look at them. I'll read them out loud because people won't be able to always to see what's on the screen. And texts are to be read out loud anyway. And that will... I'll read them and give you a chance to think about it for a sec, and then maybe just start asking some natural questions. Questions are anything that comes to your mind. There's no good questions or bad questions. I don't have questions behind my back that I'm waiting for you to get to, although I have some things that I want to make sure that we talk about today. So I hope you'll consider your questions in that spirit. So this is one. Tell me, you whom I love with all my heart, where do you pasture your flock? Where do you rest them at noon, so that I don't wander around with the flocks of your companions? If you don't know the way, most beautiful of women, then follow the tracks of the herds and graze your little goats by the tents of the shepherd. So I'll read it again because it's so short. She says, tell me, you whom I love with all my heart, where do you pasture your flock? Where do you rest them at noon, so that I don't wander around with the flocks of your companions? Well, if you don't know the way, most beautiful of women, then follow the tracks of the herds and graze your little goats by the tents of the shepherds. What seems to be happening here? What do you think you get a sense of? What do you feel like you know from reading this and hearing it? And what do you want to know? What's the scene? What's happening? Beats me. Good. Very good. It's like they told me when I was getting ready to defend my dissertation, my advisor warned me when I'm getting grilled in there, said, I don't know is always a perfectly good answer. Yeah, very important. Anybody? Susan. Hmm. Yeah. Would you like me to find you where you rest your flock at noon? Yes, no, maybe, right? You're passing a note to her in school, or passing a note to him in school in this case. Yeah, what's his answer? What's his answer? right? Would you like me to find you at noon where you pasture your flock, she asks. Yes, no, maybe. And he says, well, if you don't know, most beautiful of women, then follow the tracks of your herds and graze your little goats by the tents of the shepherds. By the way, folks, people have been arguing about what this passage is trying to say and what's happening in it for like 2,000 years. So don't feel like everybody has figured something out that you haven't, because you know what? No one has. But people have ideas about it. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So he could be non-committal, right? Well, I'm not just going to tell you. Maybe because I'm not ready to just tell you, right? I'm still non-committal. It's possible. Yes, what else? Mm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. So you hear another approach here. Maybe he's so confident that she knows the way, right? That she can, or that she can find it, that he doesn't have to just tell her, oh, turn left at the broom tree and past the first cactus, But say if you don't know your way, this isn't in the form of a rhetorical question, but it's certainly not a straight answer, is it? Right? And a straight answer can be a frustrating thing. Is frustration or delayed gratification always bad? Especially between lovers? Right? There can be teasing. There can be teasing between lovers, which is another possibility, isn't it? Tell me whom I love with all my heart. Where do you pasture your flock, right? Where do you rest your flock at noon so that I don't wander around the flocks of your companions? You don't want that, do you? I'll just wander around all the other fellas looking for you, if that makes you comfortable, if that's what you want. Well, if you don't know your way, most beautiful of women, go ahead. Go ahead. Follow the tracks of your herds and graze your goats by the tents of the shepherds. If you don't want me, but I think you do. I don't know. There's a lot that could be going on here. Yeah, John.
Is there any significance to the fact that he has a flock of sheep
Mm-hmm.
and she has goats? Is there something that men raise sheep and women raise goats?
Does it mention sheep?
It says flock.
It says flocks. Good. Flocks with sheep. Excellent question. Part of what I like about your question, John, is close reading. Close reading. The details always matter. Sometimes we can get a sense that I get the gist of what I'm reading here, and the Bible wants me to do this and not do that, or not steal or whatever, and that we don't need to dig in to the details. But the Song of Songs is poetry. And not just in poetry, but poetry is language that calls attention to itself. It wants you to look at the details. So John says, oh, flocks of sheep. He's got sheep, she's got goats. I started to follow you there. And then one thing that I remembered is that in biblical Hebrew, there's a word for flocks, and it applies to both sheep and goats. So unlike English, there's a word behind the word flocks here that applies to both. Yeah, interesting. Seeking and finding. This is where the text leaves off, by the way. He just goes on there, and next week what I hope to do is to get into the Song of Songs celebration of the body, right? The way that the Song of Songs celebrates the body. You know this already about the Song of Songs. Oh, my dearest, your hair is like a flock of goats coming down from Mount Gilead. Your neck is like David's tower. Your cheeks are like pomegranates. Right? There's a lot of this in the Song of Songs. And I look forward to doing that next week, in part including the I am black and beautiful, right? The self-celebration, the celebration of one's own body as well as the other's body. And so I'm putting that off until next week. But you can see that's what this goes into next, is just him admiring her. I picture you, my dearest, as a mare among Pharaoh's chariots. That's how I got my girlfriend to like me. I compared her to the female horses of the Pharaoh's chariotry. They just swoon when you do that. Fellas, there's a lot of tips here in this, but we'll look at those next week. But it leaves off here. Tell me where I'll find you. Well, if you don't know where you'll find me, well, what if I do this? Well, what if you do? There we are. There we are, seeking, right? A text of seeking. Yeah. And you know what? Whatever's happening here with these other shepherds, right? Where she says, tell me where I'll find you at noon so that I don't, people rest it. You know what people do at noon, by the way, right? Siesta. This is when we rest. This is when we go indoors. It's when we go into the shade, right? That's where she wants to find him. That's when she wants to find him. Where can I find you at the time that we rest, that we retire, that we go into the shade? So that I don't wander thusly at that time of day among the flocks of your companions. She raises the apparent specter of the companions, and he sort of sustains it, right? Go ahead and graze your goats by the tents of the shepherds, for whatever reason, whatever's happening here. This is the only time, this is part of the reason why I'm inclined towards the teasing hypothesis. This is the only time in the Song of Songs that the specter of other lovers is ever raised. It's the only time it happens. There's not going to be any love triangles in the Song of Songs. There's not going to be utterances of insecurity, right? That I might lose my lover to somebody else, that somebody else might take them away. They're seeking and finding, but not the specter of abandonment in that sense, or betrayal, or that kind of loss. Never. Instead, we're going to have the repeated utterance. Let's see if it comes up in this verse. Comes up a little bit later. You're going to see this more than once, but the look away when I'm scrolling if it makes you seasick. Sorry about that. But we'll find it again. I am my lover's and my lover's is mine. I am his and he is mine is going to be a refrain that comes up over and over again. That confidence that the lovers belong to one another. So what are we learning about the Song of Songs? This is biblical love. Whatever else it is, this is biblical love. You've heard of biblical marriage. Biblical marriage. Oh yeah. Is there marriage in the Song of Songs? I guess we'll have to keep looking. The answer is no. I guess we'll have to keep looking. But you'll look in vain for language of marriage or explicit language of betrothal. But what there is the language of mutual devotion. Mutual devotion between two. Mutual devotion between two, again and again in the Song of Songs. Which that's part of what interests me in that first text about the seeking, about the raising up these companions. What about the companions? It's the last we're going to hear of them. It's the last we're going to hear about that in this song. From here on out, it's just these two. It's just these two. Song of Songs, chapter 3. This is a famous one. We're going to be looking at two more this morning. And these ones are a little longer, and there's a little bit more to them. There's a lot more to them. She says, "Upon my bed, night after night, I looked for the one whom I love with all my heart. I looked for him, but I could not find him. I will rise now and go all around the city, through the streets and the squares. I will look for the one whom I love with all my heart. I looked for him, but I couldn't find him. The guards found me, those who make their way on their rounds in the city. The one whom I love with all my heart, have you seen him? No sooner did I depart from them than I found the one whom I love with all my heart. I held on to him, and now I won't let him go until I've brought him to my mother's house, to the chamber of the one who conceived me." And then she just adds one little note. I place you under oath, daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or the wild deer. Don't arouse love until it desires. And that's going to be an utterance that comes up a few times in the Song of Songs. Upon my bed, night after night, I look for my love. I will rise and go through the city. I will look for him. I couldn't find him. The guards found me, the one whom I love with all my heart. Have you seen him? No sooner did I depart from them than I found the one whom I love with all my heart. I held on to him, and I won't let him go until I've brought him to my mother's house, into the chamber of the one who conceived me. What's happening? The Song of Songs won't tell us. It won't give us any stage directions. It won't tell us how to understand. All we hear is her voice. All we hear is her voice. How might we understand? Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think it's really interesting, especially after your last comment about biblical marriage.
Mm.
Or maybe the assumption I might have is that women just, like, it's always about, like, the man's emotion or, like, one party emotion, and that women are, like, just following.
Mm.
This is not that. This is, like, she's very much the aggressive or the seeker.
Mm-hmm. She's very active, right? Sometimes when we talk about biblical marriage or biblical stories about marriage and betrothal and these things, it always seems that the man is very active, right? It often seems that the man is the one. The men make the arrangements, right? This is a culture of arranged marriage in large part. The men make the arrangements, and the women just get passed from house to from one house to another. Then naturally being like, then I think of those, I'm going to leave those aside. Yes, look for that. But here in the Song of Songs, you say, right, the woman is very active. She's a seeker, right? She lies on her bed, but then she says, I will rise, I will go around, I will go into the streets of the city looking for him, right? She'll have these encounters, apparently, with these guards, and she will be rewarded for her seeking. She's not going to be punished by the text for being the kind of wanton woman that prowls the streets looking for young men. That's the book of Proverbs. That's the book, and right in the book of Proverbs, this kind of behavior is what the book of Proverbs is written to men, to young men, to boys and young men, apparently. And they are warned, beware the woman who walks the streets, crooking her finger at young men. Her mouth is a tomb and blah, blah, blah. It's just like, you really got to look out for this lady, this woman. Not here. She goes into the streets looking for her love, looking for the one whom she loves with all her heart, and she is rewarded by the text. She finds him. She finds him, and then she doesn't just find him, she's going to take him. Isn't she? Yeah. What else do you see? What else do you want to know? Susan? Yeah. Mm. Oh. Whew. Okay. So, one comment here is she's bringing him, when she takes him, I will take him and bring him to my mother's house. It would bring him to my mother's house, to the chamber of she who conceived me, into her mother's house and her mother's bedroom. So you were saying that this is not I'm not sure that, it's hard, whether it's surreptitious or not, it is known to the family, or at least to the mother. It is known to the family, or at least to the mother, right? She doesn't have to sneak him in the window and sneak him out the window. It's not that kind of a rendezvous, right? But she's going to bring him into the mother's house, into the mother's bedroom. There's a sense of sanction. Sanction is one of those English words that means two things that are the opposite of each other. In this sense, I mean that it is permitted, right? That there seems to be a sense that this is permitted by the family. Also, this is me now, just by the way, the usual word for one's household or the phrase in the Hebrew Bible is the house of my father. It's a very common phrase, the house of my father. It's almost a technical term for the household, the extended household that lives in houses that are near each other or connected to each other. That's the house of my father, the house of the patriarch. In the Song of Songs, it is only the house of my mother, and it happens more than once. It's only the house of my mother. And then you also commented that she says, the one whom I love with all my heart, and that evokes for you the utterance, the urgency of what is urged in the Shema in Deuteronomy 6, right, verse 4, I think more or less, is you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might, right? I wonder I want to go back to the common, I'm reading the Common English Bible translation. It's a translation by committee, as most translations are. It's mostly a good translation, but there's a few parts, that's why I chose it for this. But I also keep making little changes to it because there's stuff if I had been on that committee, I would have talked him into some stuff. Nobody asked me. This in the NRSV is translated, the one whom my soul loves. The one whom my soul loves. And that's, I think, the Hebrew there is something just like that. The one whom the word is nephesh, the one whom my soul loves. It's the first, actually, I think that may be the first Hebrew word I ever learned. My introduction to Hebrew Bible professor talked about it. And something that he showed us, in the Hebrew Bible, in the Hebrew language, one has a nephesh, and it's often translated as soul, but it's not like a body and a soul kind of thing. It's not like you have a body and you have a soul. You are your nephesh, but you also have a nephesh. Your nephesh is your life, and many times it's also your appetite in some ways. In fact, the early pictographs in other languages that are related to Hebrew for the nephesh are a profile with 3 slashes to the neck, that is just calling attention to the neck. Your nephesh is your breath and your appetite. In the book of Ruth, when Naomi has had terrible experiences of death and loss, and her friends say, hi Naomi, is this Naomi? Naomi means sweetie in Hebrew. Her name is Sweetie. And she says, why do you call me sweetie when Yahweh has made me bitter in my nephesh, right? Yahweh has made me bitter. She has become bitter of nephesh. She's lost her appetite for life as a result of the losses that she suffered. So the one whom my soul loves, the one for whom I have appetite, it doesn't mean all these things at once. No text means like the whole range of a word at once. But if you're talking about sort of the connotations of a word and the things that it can bring to mind for a hearer, it could be things like the one for whom she has appetite, the one who is for her breath and life or nourishment, sustenance, is that kind of a sense, That's the one whom she loves. That's the one whom her soul loves, or the one whom she loves with all of her heart. Other thoughts or questions about what's happening with this encounter, or whatever it is? Upon my bed, night after night, I looked for the one whom I loved with all my heart. I will rise now and look for him through the streets and the squares, and take him back to the house of my mother. If you were, this is all right, so I'm a guard, right? And we come across this woman running around in the night. Have you seen the one whom my soul loves? Have you seen the one whom I love with all my heart? I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends, right? I mean, you see what I'm saying? She doesn't say his name, right? Right? Have you seen, Bill Waterford? It's not like that. Have you seen a fella yay tall, beard like lapis lazuli, torso like ivory studded with sapphires, legs like nothing? Have you seen the one whom I love with all my heart?
Is it at night that she's searching? Because I'm interested in, it must not be dangerous
Yeah, yeah. Right. Yeah, yeah, neither do I. I cross the street to avoid strangers, especially at night. But she does, yeah. And it seems to be okay. Although, how do they reply? What happens? Have you seen the one whom I love with all my heart? Have you seen him? No sooner did I depart from them than the one whom I found the one whom I love with all my heart. I don't know. I don't know what they do. Maybe they walk away from her. Maybe they talk to her and don't know. But the text doesn't say, does it? One moment she's imploring, have you seen the one whom I love with all my heart? Next moment she's found him on her own. I don't know what happens. Does one what? Mm-hmm. So maybe the guards help her. Maybe it's implied that the guards help her. It's because it's so sequential. It's hard to say. It's hard to say. Where does this begin? This whole thing begin? Upon my bed, night after night, I look for the one whom I love with all my heart. How do you look for the one you love with all your heart on your bed? What's that? Slim Pig. I mean, he's either there or he's not, right? Yeah. So, some wonder whether the whole thing is a dream and whether it has a dream quality. You know, do you ever have that thing in a dream where you're like in one place and then you're in another? You're talking to somebody and then they're gone. I don't know. So that's one possibility. Others argue that it does not that there's, so the question of whether she is just, all of this is happening on her bed as a kind of a dream, a vision, a wish, or whether she is actually rising up, whether we're supposed to understand her as actually rising. To me, it almost makes no difference. I'm reminded of, spoiler alert for a very old series. In the last book of Harry Potter, it's not much of a spoiler, but Harry's having a conversation with his mentor, Dumbledore, and they're in a train station that's not a train station. It's very misty. It's a little confusing. And Harry says, Dumbledore, I just have one more question. Is this real? Or is this happening in my head, or is it real? And Dumbledore replies, well, of course this is happening in your head, Harry, but why on earth should that mean it isn't real? And I think of that sometimes when I'm reading Song of Songs, chapter 3. I don't know that it matters. Yeah, yeah. What chapter are you in? Oh, that's coming up, isn't it? Yeah, there's only one time in this text that she's called anything in particular, if it is her, which it probably is, and she's the Shulamite. Nobody knows what a Shulamite is. It may be that she's from a place called Shulam, right? Like I'm an Evanstonian, right? Or someone may be an Israeli, because they're from Israel. She could be the Shulami, the woman from Shulam. Shulamite has the same consonants in it as Solomon. And some wonder if this epithet for her, Shulamite, is meant to evoke her as like a counterpart to Solomon. Solomon in Hebrew is Shlomo. So you could have the Shlomo and the Shulamite. But it's hard to say, no one really knows. A lot of people think they know, but then they can't get anyone to agree with them, and so it's hard to say whether they know. But that's about it. That's about what we got on the Shulamite. I'm going to go to one more chapter, and you're going to see why I chose this chapter as well. It's chapter 5. And it starts a little bit in. I was sleeping, but my heart was awake. A sound. My love is knocking. Open for me, my sister, my dearest, my love, my perfect one. My head is soaked with dew, my hair with the night mists. I have taken off my tunic. Why should I put it on again? I have bathed my feet. Why should I get them dirty? My love put his hand in through the latch hole, and my body ached for him. I rose, I went to open for my love. But my love had turned, gone away. I nearly died when he turned away. I looked for him, but I couldn't find him. I called to him, but he didn't answer me. They found me, the guards who make their rounds in the city. They struck me, bruised me, took my shawl away from me, those guards of the city walls. I place you under oath, daughters of Jerusalem. If you find my love, what should you tell him? That I am weak with love. I was sleeping, but my heart was awake. A sound, my love is knocking. Open for me, my dearest, for my head is soaked with the night mists. I have taken off my tunic. Why should I put it on again? I've bathed my feet. Why should I get them dirty? My love put his hand through the latch hole. My body ached for him. I rose and went to open for my love. My hands dripped myrrh, my fingers liquid myrrh over the handles of the lock. I went and opened for my love, but my love had turned, gone away. I nearly died when he turned away. I looked for him, but I couldn't find him. The guards found me. They beat me. They struck me. They took my shawl away from me. Those guards of the city wall. I place you under oath, daughters of Jerusalem. If you find my love, what should you tell him? Tell him that I'm weak with love. Well, that took a turn. Huh? Questions, comments, observations? These are the only two narrative episodes of this kind in the Song of Songs. There's a lot of exclamation and description. Maybe there's some narrative-y stuff along the way, but nothing like this, nothing sustained, right, with this kind of storytelling. It's just these two night scenes, both beginning in bed, both involving the seeking and finding of the lover, both involving the guards, right? So similar and also so different. What are some of the differences in this one from the first? Guards beat her up. Either they ignore her or they help her or they don't help her or whatever happens there. They don't hurt her. We don't know what they did, but at least from what we're told, nothing like that happens. From what we're told, that's all we can go on. Here we are told, right, that they beat her and they take her shawl. Yeah. So maybe it can be rough stuff for a woman out on the streets looking for the one whom her soul loves. Maybe sometimes it's okay and sometimes it's not. Yeah, different. What else is different? Throughout the song, just on that again, he will seek her many times. But when we see him seeking her, he's bounding around on the cliffs and the mountains like a stag or a gazelle. When he comes to the door, he certainly has been able to walk the streets of the city unmolested by guards to make his way to the door, right? It's not the same for men and women, maybe. Right? So sometimes we get a sense that both men and women can walk the streets freely and search for one another, right? Chapter 3, maybe not so much all the time, right? Maybe there is a difference between the sexes in the way that they live in this society, even in their dreams, or even in whatever's happening in all of this. What else is different? in initiative. Say more. Mm. Yeah. Initiative. Initiative. In chapter 3, the initiative was entirely hers, right? She left her bed in her thoughts or in action. She left her bed to find him. She found him. She inquired about him. She found him. She took him or will take him into her mother's house. Here, the initial initiative is his, right? Or at least at the beginning of the scene, right? The initiative is his. He knocks. He knocks and he implores entry. Oh, it's damp out here. I'm going to catch my death. There is in the Egyptian literature, in the Egyptian love literature, a very similar theme that's similar but different. It's called the lover denied. And it's a little vignette that plays out again and again in the Egyptian literature where it's similar to this. A young man comes to a young woman's door and implores entry. She doesn't let him in. She doesn't let him in. He goes away dejected, spouting poetry. The poor guy. He's like Romeo, except, Juliet doesn't let him up into the balcony. But here, she responds, I'm reminded of our first scene. If you don't know, where do you I've taken off my tunic. In the Hebrew, it's not so much the why, but it's a rhetorical question. I have taken off my tunic. Should I put it on again? I'm in bed. I'm going to have to get dressed to get up and get the door, but I'm already in bed. Should I do that? Should I put on my tunic again? I've bathed my feet. Should I get them all dirty again? Getting the door? She doesn't say yes and she doesn't say no, right? She just asks, right? My love, there's that initiative. My love puts his hand through the latch hole, and my body ached for him. I rose, initiative, and went to open, right? So she's taking her part in the initiative, and it turns out her hands are dripping with myrrh. Her fingers are dripping with liquid myrrh. Myrrh is a spice, a scent, right? It comes up more than once in the Song of Songs. Remember, I read this briefly in the last couple weeks. It's in chapter 1, if I recall, near the end of chapter 1. My love is a little bag of myrrh. He sleeps all night between my breasts. Right? So the lover is compared to an amulet that one might wear and wear to bed for whatever reasons. So this association of myrrh with love and intimacy and the bedroom has already been established. And her fingers are dripping. Her fingers are literally dripping with liquid myrrh. I don't know whether a young woman would have just gone to bed alone, dripping with liquid myrrh, just every night. Sounds messy. Or was she prepared? Did she prepare herself for her lover? Initiative. Oh my goodness. Was the initiative hers all along? Initiative. Questions of initiative that aren't fully answered. Questions of initiative that aren't fully answered. Questions that aren't fully answered. What happens when the lovers find one another? You know this, you may be already there yourselves, probably a lot of you are, but there's a lot of double entendre and innuendo in the Song of Songs. I've spent a lot of time, more than probably most people would want to. I get paid for this kind of thing, it's fine. Trying to understand how locks worked in the ancient world. And it does appear that part of how a lock would work is like if I'm entering from the outside, I put my hand through a hole, and if I have a key, that's where the key gets worked, is in here, or I just grab the latch and open it. I'm not sure about this though, but I'm getting that sense, and so it would make sense that he would put his hand through the hole. There are other translations besides the CEB that really ramp up the sexual innuendo in this text in chapter 5. With the lover, with his head covered in, there's a lot of moisture. His head is covered with dew and mist. Her fingers are dripping with myrrh. He's thrusting it. This is Bible study, folks. This is Bible study. The Song of Songs will raise, and we'll see this again with the body next week, and I know we're just at time, so we're going to see this, but it's also never answered. What happens when the lovers come together? There's this open-ended language, and we'll look at this a little bit more next week. I was hoping to today, but you'll get the idea. They find each other in places like the mother's chamber, or the wine house, or a garden, or the king's chambers. And you get this loose language about intimacy with some sense of double entendre, but it's never explicated, and it's very often put in terms of the future or the past. I will climb. Let my lover come. Oh, that he would give me the kisses of his mouth. And sometimes in the past, I have eaten my choicest fruits, right? But it's always kept at a distance. Whatever happens between these lovers is allowed to remain private from us in that sense. We never become voyeurs. We never become peeping toms on their love. But I'll say this a little bit more next week, where we're allowed to overhear. We're allowed to listen and to hear and participate. So biblical love, seeking and finding that never ends. The song begins with seeking and finding. Oh, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. I seek him. It's going to end with seeking and finding. It never ends. It never comes to a close. It's like a circle. Love, romantic love, never ends. Even when we've achieved our heart's desire, the person who is our heart's desire, right? Should we not always be wooing? Should we not always be wooing? Should wooing end? We never really find in that final sense. And it's not necessarily young. You know, I keep referring to them as a young man and a young woman, but they're never described. They have the breathlessness and the ache and the urgency of young love. Is that restricted to the young in our experience? Bible doesn't say it is, not even here in the Song of Songs. So some things to think about biblical love. And we'll pick up on them next week as we look at the way biblical love in the Song of Songs celebrates the body of the other and our own body. Thanks so much for this week. Thank you so much for this week. I look forward to next week. All right. Now go pray. With your bodies, with your whole bodies. Go seek the one whom you love with your whole heart. Thank you. You have a good week too. See you next time. Bye.